Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 216 of the Author Stories Podcast. I'm your host, Hank Garner. Find all of the archives of the show over at hankgarner.com, and when you're there, like I tell you every week, please subscribe. It helps us in the rankings and helps other people find the show. I'd like to tell you about some sponsors that I'm very happy to have today. Pico's House. Authors, if you're looking to take your book to the next level, you need to talk to my friend Crystal Pico Watanabe from Pico's House. She offers developmental editing, line editing, beta reading, and proofreading. She will soon be launching a book interior design service, print formatting, but you can inquire about that now if you're interested. She's edited over 70 novels and novellas and 130 short stories, and she comes recommended by best-selling authors such as Hugh Howey and Samuel Peralta. Most of her experiences with science fiction, speculative fiction, and middle-grade fantasy, but she enjoys all genres and would love to talk to you about your book project. She offers complimentary 2-page sample edits and complimentary track changes review after the edit. Visit picoshouse.com and let her know that you heard about it on Author Stories, and she'll give you a discount. That's picoshouse.com. Also, Russell Blake in his book Day After Never, Blood Honor, the first book in the post-collapse series that Hugh Howey called the best post-apocalyptic series I've read in ages. When the world ends, I hope this book survives. Can't wait for the sequel. Well, you don't have to wait for the sequel because you can get into this series now and read all 6 books. There's a link to it in the show notes. Russell Blake, Day After Never, Blood Honor. Galactic Satori Chronicles, written by Nick Breaker and Paul E. Hicks, is a raucous sci-fi adventure introducing Asher, a young man whose world is turned upside down when he discovers that his fiance's death has been directly caused by an imminent alien invasion. He and his friends channeled his anger and grief into the ultimate weapon against alien technology. Human emotions were the one thing the Kron didn't account for when they started their attack on Earth. Book 1 Earth and Book 2 Kron are now available. Galactic Satori Chronicles. Also, Series 2525 by Michael Lee Nelson. In this book, you fly along on the sci-fi action adventures of Series Tari 25, Playboy superstar of the Zero Gravity League. He desperately searches for his mother, long held captive among the galaxy's 500 worlds. When he too is kidnapped by a pirate fleet, forced to duel to the death to save a slave with powerful secret abilities, he determines to fight his way up the pirate ranks. Can Ceres kill his father to rescue his mother, who will save his soul from himself? This book reminds me of Buck Rogers and Battlestar Galactica. It gave me that same sci-fi adventure feeling from when I was a kid. We need more science fiction like this. There's a link to it in the show notes, Series 2525 by Michael Lee Nelson. My good friend Stefan Boltz has recently released a new book, and it's called Six String. Jennifer Dalton dreamed of being a singer for as long as she could remember. That dream has kept her alive throughout a childhood mired in poverty in a broken and abusive home. When her younger brother dies and her mother takes refuge in alcohol, the emotional toll becomes unbearable. One morning she runs away, taking with her the one thing she owns, her beloved 6-string guitar. This is the story of a girl finding herself alone in the good and the bad, the friends she makes, and a choice that could rob her of everything she's won. 6-String by Stefan Boltz. Tears of Heaven, Flames of Perdition, Book 1 by R.A. McCandless. A child of angels and humans, Dell is a sarcastic, fast-talking, dangerous, and unpredictable demon hunter. She and her partner, Marin, take their orders directly from the angel Ahadiel. They obey, or they'll be destroyed. It's not the job Dell wants, but it's the job she has. Normally, banishing a rogue demon back to hell wouldn't be a problem. Dell and Marin have a few centuries of experience. It's all part of the job description. But when Ahadiel orders them to take down 3 demons at once, the job goes from bad to worse. The demons with supernatural powers and their own agenda have kidnapped children for their own nefarious ends. With angels breathing down her neck, children to save, and demons gunning for her blood, Dell is running out of time. That's exactly where she wants to be. If you're a fan of Dresden Files, you're going to love this book. Tears of Heaven, Flames of Perdition, Book 1 by R.A. McCandless. And Book 2 is about to drop anytime now. More news about that coming soon. Thanks to my good friend Ed Gosney. With over 100 episodes of cool comics in my collection to date, Ed Gosney highlights comic collecting and fandom in a whole new light. Each week, Ed peels back the layers of your favorite comics and brings you something new. Featuring books in his personal collection as well as some that got away, Cool Comics in My Collection is your go-to for comics nostalgia. edgosney.com. Hey authors, you know that your book has to be edited to the highest quality standards to set it apart from the pack, but what about the visual presentation? Kevin Summers at literaryoutlaw.com offers the very best in artisanal book formatting to make your book shine. Visit literaryoutlaw.com and tell Kevin you heard about him on Author Stories and receive a discount. Kevin is who I use for my book formatting. He carries the Author Stories seal of approval. literaryoutlaw.com. Stay tuned after the show for an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves' Jason Crane series. And as always, thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Sheena Kamal on the show. She has a brand new book called The Lost Ones that is absolutely fantastic. I've been reading the advanced reader copy, and it's going to be something that you guys are really going to love. Sheena, welcome to the show.
Hello, Hank. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you for taking time to do this. I love discovering new writers and discovering new stories about writers. So thanks for taking time. I begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or a storyteller?
My first memory, it was actually probably later than a lot of writers do. I took some time off of from college to go do some volunteering in South Africa, and I loved it there, and I felt this pull to that country, and so I went back to Poland this semester, and then I went back to South Africa, and I was so inspired by just being there, just being a fish out of water, the different experiences, and I was seeing life in a new way, and I wanted to write something about that. And I guess maybe I tried to write a novel or a short story or something, just put something on the page at that time in my life. And nothing that I wrote was very good. I do remember I made a pretty decent metaphor about a tree. Which like maybe doesn't sound that sophisticated or whatnot, but at the time I was like, oh my God, this is good. But it was just the one good thing that came out of, that writing. And then largely I went back and I finished in school and I moved into acting. And through that I started screenwriting and trying to pursue that as well. But my first memory was me being in a different country and wanting to record some of what I was feeling and use my imagination to sort of help that process.
That first good metaphor is like a drug dealer, that gives you the first taste is free, and then the rest of your life you're chasing that next good metaphor.
It took me a long time, actually. Yeah, that's why I remember that one. I'm like, if I can only get back to the tree.
Right, exactly. Where did you grow up?
I moved to Canada from the Caribbean when I was about 6 years old, and I grew up in Toronto, the east end of Toronto, which is very diverse and multicultural, and it was very immigrant-oriented, so it was really such a delightful mix of things.
Nice. How old were you when you left the Caribbean?
6.
Wow. Talk about not only culture shock probably, but temperature shock.
Oh, absolutely.
That had to be a...
Absolutely.
You probably didn't even own a winter coat, did you?
No, I didn't. Yeah, I thought we were going to live in igloos, and we moved in the summer, and I was so disappointed there were no igloos. But then, then the ice and the snow came, and I was like, why don't we actually have an igloo? That's what we
hilarious.
need.
That's hilarious. What got you interested in going to South Africa and doing the volunteer work? What was it that compelled you?
Well, that's a long and sordid story of me being a youth activist when I was a teenager. So when I was about maybe 14 years old, I started volunteering with a youth organization, and we were it was all about children's rights and looking at child labor and child exploitation around the world. So the organization, it was far-reaching in scope. It had a lot of varying interests, but I think it started to inform my worldview and for me to start paying attention to social issues and whatnot. And so a lot of the kids who were part of the organization traveled to do volunteering and whatnot. And I wasn't really able to do as much traveling as they were at the time. So when the opportunity came up in college, you know, I felt very lost after my first year and into the second year as well. And I needed something different. And a friend of mine who I'd worked with in the organization had worked with this program in Durban that they worked with street girls. So basically what they did is every year they took 10 street girls off the street and ran a home for them and gave them life skills, paid their school tuition, and they had a roof over their heads and food in their bellies, and the end goal was to reintegrate them back into their communities. So I spent about 3 months with them, which I've never forgotten. It was a very illuminating experience.
I'll bet. And all of those experiences shape us as writers and storytellers. And to me, that was very evident in your writing. You can always tell when someone is passionate about something, or when things mean something deeply to a writer. But a good writer can take those things and feed it to you without beating you over the head. With we've all read a writer, and on the first 3 or 4 pages we know everything that writer believes, and we're like, okay, well, that's a little heavy-handed. But you have created characters that are a little flawed and very real, and you kind of introduce the reader to these interesting situations. I'm trying not to give away too much of the book. Is that a conscious thing for you? And when you sat down to write, did all of these experiences that you had kind of flow into that?
Absolutely. I mean, every single one of us is based on the experiences that we've had that inform our character and our worldview. I don't know that it was conscious the way that I think it's just the way that I think, and my background as an actor as well kind of, I think, helps me figure out how to approach character, and that maybe it's not so heavy-handed, but you actually give a little, and you see in situations how people react and how that informs them, and how certain memories stick with you and really becomes part of your consciousness. For me, I guess it's weird because when I'm an activist, I was fully one of those heavy-handed people. Like you would know my opinions like right off the bat. You could not have a conversation with me. I could debate the hell out of any subject, and I was very headstrong, and I was just the most annoying teenager you could possibly imagine. So self-important, and just I won a huge scholarship in Canada, and it not that it went to my head, but it was one of those things where it was like, yeah, because I'm an activist and I'm fighting for the good of blah, 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 who cares? It ultimately just ended up me assessing myself and being like, actually, I'm a huge hypocrite. Look at me benefiting from telling stories about people in this heavy-handed way, whereas and actually gaining accolades and getting a scholarship and getting entry into a university and having people treat me different and getting speaking engagements because I was out doing public speaking as well. Whereas the people that I was speaking about, they would never have the same opportunities that I did, just based on backgrounds, different, the family you were born into kind of thing. And after a certain time, I just felt like I am such a hypocrite for benefiting from this, and it made me question the world system that we're part of, and it made me approach people in a different way. So it's not so black and white anymore for me, and that's sort of what does that make any sense? Am I making any sense?
No, that makes perfect sense, because you meet so many, and maybe a lot of activists are young people, and maybe that's because we do feel so passionate about things when we're I don't know, maybe it's before the world has kind of worn us down a little bit, and, but yeah, and I think, but when that passion is tempered with a little bit of wisdom, and you start realizing that real change is affected person to person, and, I don't know, but yes, I know exactly what you're saying. How did you kind of transition out of that stage, when you were maybe kind of having these feelings that, okay, maybe I am a little bit of a hypocrite and I need to maybe approach the world a little bit differently? How did you kind of come out of that?
I abandoned it completely, and I yeah, there was no transition. It was just like, I can't honestly do this anymore. And, well, what had actually happened was that I went back to South Africa to do a term at a university there, and I looked for the girls, that the 10 girls that were part of the program, and only 3 of them were at home, and the rest were back on the streets, and I was devastated. Because you fall for them, and I was like, well, why do they have this program? Because ultimately, what had happened was that they fixed the girls, or tried to help the girls, but they didn't try to help the communities, and so they were put back into situations that were unsafe. Wow. And it was very devastating, and I was just like, it made me question the systems in place, and so when I say I abandoned it completely, I really did, because I no longer believed that how we approach trying to help, like organizationally, I guess, bilaterally, multilaterally, I stopped believing that could work. And so I had this creative drive in me that had started in maybe not started in South Africa, but I started connecting with in South Africa. So I finished my degree, and after that, I went into acting, and I started booking commercials right away. And that sort of took me on this path that was about 10 years long of trying to be an actor and trying to be a screenwriter, because I guess I acknowledged that maybe I do have something with language, and that I could do something with language and put stories for screen. But if you've ever tried to write for screen, you would know that it's a different beast. You don't have as much creative freedom. You have to collaborate with people, and maybe I don't like that so much. Maybe I want it to be mine, all mine. And so I went to write a novel.
You are not the first person on the other side of this microphone to say the same exact thing, so don't feel bad.
Okay, good.
Oh, when you went into acting, were you back in Toronto?
I was, yeah.
Yeah, Toronto seems to be a really creative place, a real hub of kind of creative energy. Were you part of a creative community there? No,
and that maybe was why I didn't go very far. There is a creative community there. There are creative communities everywhere, because that's part of, I think, human nature, is to want to create and play to your imagination. But just that world in general is very hierarchical, and it's kind of difficult to connect. And in the screen world, there's a lot of ego that's involved, and it was just me constantly feeling that there's that I was just knocking my head against a wall and saying, please, someone, is there anyone there on the other side of the wall? And there were no voices answering back to me. So it was kind of a lonely experience, to be honest with you, trying to be a creative person in the screen arts.
Wow. I don't think people really realize that side of it as much.
Well, yeah, because it's all about, people say you can make anything on an iPhone, whatever, but you actually have to have a talent for it, to direct something, to act in something like that's on your iPhone. Like that's an actual skill that people undervalue. So when you don't have all those skills to put things, and also to edit things appropriately, and editing is a key part of things. So when you don't have that skill, you're relying on other people to recognize you, and to appreciate your talent and give you chances. And it's all about money and budgets, and whether or not they have the budget to do that, and the budget to give to you to do that, right? So it's like you're constantly asking for these chances. And after a while, that sucks the life out of you, because you spend so much time asking and willing people to see you, that's energy that can be put into the work. And that's where my book came from, is that I was a researcher, and I had this idea, and instead of pursuing it for screen, I thought, no, I want to save this creative energy that I have, and I want to put it into something that is mine. And I had no idea that it was going to be published or anything like that. I started off way at the bottom, right? I say that I do have one connection who is a crime writer, a friend of mine, but he was so high above me that, I would never have access to his agent or anything like that, right? So it was just about me wanting this thing, to write this thing for myself, as opposed to write it for other people and try to say to other people, help me, take a chance on me. I was really tired of that.
Well, I've talked to several actors and some filmmakers who express some of the same kinds of frustrations that I've got this vision in my head, but I can't connect with the right people, or I just don't have the opportunities, or maybe I don't have the collaborations to bring this thing to fruition. But when I'm writing, I am in complete control of the entire process. Did you feel that way when you started working out this story?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It could be anything that I wanted it to be. And I didn't show it to anybody until I pitched it to agents. So it was all mine. It was from my imagination, from my heart, and my soul. Like, that's so cheesy, but really, when you're kind of alone doing this stuff, it does feel like it's part of your heart and soul that you're putting on that page there. And not that other people don't matter, but would they even care, right? So you're really doing it for yourself at that stage.
So what was it? What was the catalyst that kind of started you to thinking about this particular story, and kind of at what point did it become alive as a real thing to you?
Right. Well, so I was researching for this television crime drama series, and it was looking at the relationship between the police and journalists. And there's a very famous case in Canada, the crackhead mayor Rob Ford case, that made some. Yeah. So we were kind of looking into that, and it was my job to pay attention to the headlines. And I enjoyed the research immensely, but I sort of became addicted to just poring over several newspapers every day just to see kind of what came out of it. And I was very moved by stories about gender violence in Canada. There's some issues there that I felt inspired by, that just sort of captured me. And this character came to me, and she had a very complicated history and a very complicated heritage. And my idea was that she would exist in some of these gray spaces in Canada that you don't actually see as part of the quote-unquote Canadian story, the Canadian dream. You don't really see these things play out internationally and even nationally. So I don't know, she hooked me. And I knew immediately that the story was going to take place in Vancouver. I'd been to Vancouver once before, and it was this hellish, rain-filled nightmare of like no sun kind of experience. And I'm from the Caribbean, so I need this vitamin D. And I just, I didn't get any of it there. But I knew, I was like, this is where she lives. These are the streets she walks. I was so taken by it, and also so frustrated with trying to be seen in the screen arts and being an actor and a screenwriter, that I knew I had something, and I knew that I had to give it a chance to breathe and to grow. So I then did the most logical thing that one could possibly do, where I quit my job and I moved across the country. And
nice.
I know, right? Yeah, it was. I mean, I've done a lot of crazy things, but that was one of the craziest things I've done, because I didn't have a job out here or anything. I had my trusty old Actors Union card, where it allowed me to work as an extra at a slightly higher rate than if you're non-union. And yeah.
Well, there's a lot of that work out there these days, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Vancouver's really booming.
Yeah.
So it kept me it kept me going while I adjusted to the fact that I just packed up my life and moved out west to write a book that I didn't know how to write and nobody wanted, and or nobody asked me to write, and yeah, so it was a weird thing to do. And a weird experience. I look back on it and I'm like, what were you thinking? Why did you? I mean, I'm glad that I did, but I don't know if I would make the same decision again.
Yeah.
At this point.
Well, that's my favorite part of the show, is where very rarely, and a handful of people out of the more than 200 guests that I've had, go to school to be a writer, and that's the only profession they've ever had, is they pursue writing. I mean, that's literally a handful of people that have done that. Most everyone else has pursued something else, and there's this really weird circuitous route that winds them up, at this place where they're a writer. You said that you moved out west and you didn't even know how to write a book, and no one had asked for this book. How did you start? What was your what was your process in figuring out the process?
Right. Well, so the character, her name is Nora. She has a voice in my head. Sounds crazy, but she does. And so certain thoughts are hers, or certain observations are hers to me. And so that's how I started, is when I moved out west, I had this voice that would say little things, and then I would write them down, have little observations about, I don't know, the world, the land, the whatever it was. And in that I could figure out what the story was through this person's eyes. So it's not a third-person narrative, it's a first-person narrative. So everything's very immediate and happens to her and through her lens. And so she's really the key to it all. And that's how I started to figure out how to do it. And I read a lot. I'm a nerd, and I guess I've read enough books to plot something out. And also, actually, I think a key part of it as well is that in screenwriting and in the film world in general, outlines are a big deal. And so what helped me was the fact that I'd read a lot of outlines, and so I could see story beats and story arcs. And I wasn't afraid to think big in terms of that's kind of crazy, but it's cinematic. It appeals in a certain way. So that actually helped me a bit. But it wasn't like I wrote an outline and I decided it was going to be like that. It was all very organic, and I felt my way through it. And I think that's actually how I approach writing, is that I've never learned how to do it. I feel my way through what to my eyes, to my mind, seems right.
I think a lot of people have that sort of process, that there's this this hybrid of the excuse me, this hybrid of strict outliner and strict make it up as you go. I think a lot of people get those story beats out and then just kind of see what their characters are going to do within those confines.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's different for everybody, and not. That's why I find advice so bizarre, because it's really just personally how you find your way through it, and that's what makes us all unique.
Right. Well, I look at like writing advice books as like buying one of those giant packs of screwdrivers at the hardware store, and there's like 2 screwdrivers out of that you'll ever use, and the rest of it are for somebody else, But you kind of pick out what it is that you want and figure out how it works for you.
Yes, absolutely. That's a really good analogy.
So were you a big fan of crime thrillers? You said you read a lot, but did you read in this genre a lot?
I do, yeah. I mean, I don't think of myself necessarily as a genre person because I'll read anything. I'll read everything from literary fiction to romance to crime fiction to thrillers to, your espionage stuff. It's whatever. Whatever I go to the library or the bookstore and people say you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but I totally do. I pick a cover that looks good, and then I open the first page. And if the first page speaks to me somehow, then I'll read it. It doesn't matter what it is.
Well, don't judge a book by its cover is the worst advice ever. We all judge books by their covers. Let's be real.
Exactly. And then you see a good cover, and you're like, that is something that I'm going to hold on the subway.
Behind me is a giant bookshelf, and 80% of those books were bought because I like the cover. So. There's a magical feel to going into a library or a bookstore and actually touching the books, holding a book in your hand and looking at the cover and the font, looking at it, just turning the pages, and sometimes you get a feel for a story. Oh yeah.
Even before you read a summary or anything like that.
Oh yeah, the book speaks to you. I don't care if that sounds weird or not. I've bought books because I've got that feeling.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure. So you got the book written finally. What did you do with it? How did you, okay, so I've done this thing. Now what do I do with it?
Well, then I did also a very normal and logical thing. I flew to New York to pitch it.
Here's my book.
Exactly, that no one has read.
Right.
I had no beta readers or anything like that. So I flew to New York to pitch at the big Thriller Fest conference that happens in every July. They have a pitch fest component where aspiring authors can go pitch to agents, and it's like speed dating, I guess. And yeah, speed dating where you're like, please take me. You're the desperate one. You're like, I don't know, the recently divorced one who's like, I really just need someone to take a chance on here. And yeah, that was I pitched, and I actually prepared it very, I guess, rigidly. In that I used my acting experience to inform how I was going to approach the pitch and how to relate to these agents and like not only see them as people, not as like dragons that are guarding the gates to the publishing industry, but actually like people who might be interested in me as an author and the book as a product, I guess. And I found that very helpful. It worked out.
I love that. So did you land a deal at that conference?
I did. I got an agent. She was my first choice, and I sat down to speed date with her, and she was the first person that I lined up for, and immediately there was a connection, and there was something there, and I felt like, okay, if nothing else, I made a really good, I guess, connection. I wouldn't. No, it's not a friend. That's me being silly. But you connect with somebody and you're like, okay, well, this is a person that I can, I want to work with. Not just that I have to work with or I'd like to work with, but like I hope this works out, based on you. And so she emailed me maybe about 2 months later, and I revised for her, and then she submitted, and I guess maybe another 2 months after I spoke with her, I had 4 deals.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. It was
So what was that 2 months like between going to Thriller Fest and speed dating and waiting for that email?
It was a nightmare.
I'm laughing with you.
Yeah, I was, okay, so I have to say, I was completely broke at the time, right? So I couldn't even afford to go to New York, because you don't really make that much extra, right? And it's not cheap. So I got back from Thriller Fest and I was starving because with the exchange rate, like it was like maybe one meal a day or something, and so I was very hungry and also really broke. So I worked a lot, and I was like, please don't think about it. It's out of your hands right now, but you can't help but obsess every single waking moment of your day. Is this going to happen? Did I make the right decision? Am I in debt for nothing? Like, what are you thinking of? Why did you even do this? Am I pretty? Like, all these things. It's just like,
where's the next craft services table?
Exactly. Yeah. How can I manage to steal food from the set yet again?
I love it. So you get the email a couple months later. You revise for her, and then it's off to the races. I think a lot of people don't appreciate the amount of luck that goes into making connections and being at the right place at the right time. But with all those factors in place, you still have to have something that they want, and I think more and more today you have to be a person that they want. So I love that you talked about using your acting skills in making the best presentation for yourself that you could and for your book. What kind of advice could you give other people who may be in that similar situation as to what you think the thing was that made you stand apart?
That's a good question. I think you hit it on the head when you said people want to work with a real person that they can connect with. So you can be a genius. I mean, I'm pretty much all writers think that they're geniuses, and all actors think that they're geniuses. Like you wouldn't take this risk and do this thing unless you thought that you had something. And there's a certain amount of ego involved in actually that act of creation, anyway, right? But yeah, aside from that, you have to sort of step back and look at it in perspective and look at the other person as a person. So agents are people who are passionate about authors and about books, and not just things that they can sell, but people that they can work with. And so are publishers. They're investing in an author, and they've got to make sure that it's not necessarily about your followers or anything like that. It's about who you are as a person. Do you seem like someone that they can work with? Are you open to notes? Are you open to feedback? Are you a pain in the ass, right? Like this, if you are, right, your book, you have to be a genius. So unless you're a genius, don't be a pain in the ass. That's my advice.
Well, and I think geniuses are probably a dime a dozen these days, so still don't be a pain in the ass, even if you are. Just, But the new book is called The Lost Ones. It is available now, and it's fantastic. I love this book. I was hooked from the very first chapter, and I really wish you a lot of success on it. What is your website where people, if they've kind of been intrigued by you and your story, where they could go connect with you?
They can reach me at www.sheenakamal.com.
Excellent. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. Sheena, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
Oh, thank you. It was such a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Tune in for new episodes every Tuesday and Friday. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
The waiter poured out wine and left. Zeph leaned back and enjoyed the river breeze. The rooftop at Bridgeview would be the perfect place to watch the meteor shower. His parents were canoodling, whispering to each other. Zeph couldn't get used to having a mother again. She took him shopping, to movies, came to see his debates at school. And Hedwig didn't seem to mind his ex and son spending time together, which was surprising. In fact, Zeph had never seen his father so mellow. He was sneaking out in the evenings to go out with Jessica, but they were hiding it from him. Trying not to get his hopes up, he guessed. He wasn't sure how he
My
felt about
jumpers
the
had
idea
knives
of his
and I
parents back together.
I liked those scars.
He'd wanted
I
it
guess.
for so long that he
I
should
didn't
have
like
been
getting
overjoyed
jumped at the time.
But he felt
Kinda
only
was
a
not
nagging
on my
sense of
to-do
something
list.
brewing.
Kind of was
Of
going to
tectonic
Sonic and getting a
forces
damn
shifting under
slushie,
his
but
feet.
it's still a good
It all
scar,
felt
yeah?
like a house of cards
Hey,
built on the San
Here's
Andreas
the
fault.
best.
He couldn't
twisted
trust
in his
it,
seat and
even
pulled
though
his
he
shirt
wanted
away
to,
from his left shoulder.
desperately.
Damn, huh? That
Two
was a
shooting
bad
stars
fight.
streaked past and
Tell me.
disappeared behind the Jersey Palisades. Zeph made a wish on them, but wasn't entirely sure what he'd wished for.
It's time we told you, said Hedwig.
Though you've probably guessed, said Jessica.
Hedwig took her hand in his. Son, how would you feel about us becoming a family again?
Zeph tried to be glad, but it just didn't seem real to him.
Just like that?
It was just as much of a surprise to us, said Jessica.
Hedwig took a swallow of his wine. We're both different people. Better people, hopefully. We'd like to make it work.
At least on a trial basis, said Jessica.
And there are other things we need to tell you.
Hedwig glanced at Jessica.
Should I go first, or do you want to?
Age before beauty.
Pearls before swine. Quick, though, before we curse the waiter. Our appetizers should be out soon.
He conceded the stage to her. Zeph frowned. What did Hedwig mean, curse the waiter? What was going on here? Jessica put her hand on Zeph's. Can you hear me, son? Zeph's eyes went wide. Her lips hadn't moved. He'd heard her in his head.
How did you do that?
He stammered. Jessica smiled. She took a cigarette from her purse and gave Hedwig a look. Honey, it's your turn. Hedwig nodded, extended a hand, and lit her cigarette with the tip of his finger. Zeph jerked away from the table, his chair tipping, and fell over backwards. He grabbed at the tablecloth, and as he pulled, wine glasses, bread rolls, and a carafe of water crashed all around. His head hit the wooden deck and bounced. His mother knelt and cradled his head in her lap. Sorry, baby. We should have warned you.
You had to know sometime. Up you go. Hedwig smiled, offering his hand. We never said it would be a normal family.